I do a lot of mentoring with early stage businesses. They imagine they can walk into a bank and say to a bank, we're going to save you £1 million. Well, £1 million is just a rounding error to a globally significant financial institution. And if you think about it, you're talking to somebody who spent 25 years trying to build their empire. When you say that you can reduce the headcount by 20%, actually that's an empire that's very important to them.
Driving sustainable growth for a B2B company can be daunting, especially when trends in marketing are evolving so quickly. The road to success is continually under construction, so you have to be on the lookout for new insights to help you drive growth. Welcome to Trend Spotters. Our goal is to provide practical wisdom through brief conversations with B2B thought leaders to help you grow your business. Here's Candyce to introduce today's guest.
When selling to enterprise accounts, empathy, understanding the mindsets of your players is crucial. You're not going to win business if your buying committee doesn't believe your organization both understands and can help with their needs. Today's podcast is about the importance of empathy, compassion, and emotional intelligence in your messaging strategy. Whether you're talking to the press, writing copy for the website, speaking at a conference, or meeting with prospects, you have to communicate a deep understanding of your target audience's reality. Empathy needs to infuse all of your messages going out to the market. For today's interview, I sat down with Julia Streets of Streets Consulting. Her company helps financial services firms develop integrated marketing and public relations plans. We talk about the crucial steps that firms need to take at each stage in their growth to drive enterprise sales. You'll get tips to help you figure out what keeps your prospects awake at night, convince them that your product can help, and get a deal through procurement. So Julia, thank you for joining me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm delighted to be here.
So you've been in business for 10 years. You work with companies in the financial technology space. And one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is that companies really need to think about communications more broadly than media relations. Let's start there and tell me more about what you're thinking about from that frame of reference.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the States, a lot of people talk about PR in the sense of media relations and very kind of focused on what is our media profile, where do we get our editorial, what's our coverage in some of the online publications, as well as some of the more traditional ones. And what we find is working with a lot of early stage businesses, and in fact, it doesn't matter where you are in your corporate evolution, is integrated business development, marketing, communication strategies return a higher return on investment, essentially. It's all about basically aligning with growth targets, business targets, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, and thinking about how do you drive campaigns that will feed into your sales pipeline all the way through.
You know, we really focus a lot with our clients in a similar space and really thinking about the message from the customer's point of view, understanding how their message is going to affect the whole buying committee. And I know that you guys look at that too. Where do you start? Where does a business get started in really thinking about an overall communication strategy?
Well, we always start with as close to the principles of the business, as in the individuals of the business. So with an early stage company, we'll start with the entrepreneur or we sit with the board and we really think about where's the business today? Where's it trying to get to? Short-term, medium-term, long-term ambitions. And that could be around, literally getting started, raising some seed funding, getting a single product to market, right the way through to looking for further investment, regional expansion, product expansion, corporate growth in terms of hiring strategies, as well as obviously product development as well. And then we think about in every stage of the corporate evolution or the corporate journey, who are all of the stakeholders as well as the customers that you're trying to serve? So thinking through buyer, decision maker, influencer, user, and also, really importantly, the roadblocker. So think about the sales cycle. So think about, who's involved in that and what's their relationship with you, known or unknown. Think about who do they see as your competitors, perceived or real, because often there are misperceptions that exist. But ultimately, really think about what are the challenges that keep them awake at night that you're solving. Everyone's coming out with products and services that, kind of with a leading provider of that, or we've got, cutting edge technology in this. But ultimately, it's the things that keep them awake at night, whether that's cost, risk, regulation, obviously is a really key one in financial services and capital markets. But actually getting into the detail of when you talk about regulation, what are those clauses? What are those elements within the regulation that organization and that individual is charged to solve? And the more you can resonate with those challenges very, very precisely and very specifically, the more that they will want to hear what you have to say. They'll want to engage with what you do. But they're only one piece in that journey. So the buyer could be, for example, head of trading. The influencer could be the head of compliance or the head of legal or the head of risk or head of ops. The implementer is the person who's actually ultimately going to be putting that technology in. But also don't forget the CFO, who's going to be the budget holder, who's going to be signing that check. And then even further down the track, that could be a sales cycle, which in some cases can take years, particularly if you're selling to large banks and financial institutions. Well, let's hope it's shorter. But ultimately, you cross the desk of the procurement officer. And the procurement officer is going to be looking for, well, that's great. Obviously, a lot of that's around service and price and products. But also, do you present a supplier risk to the organization? When we talk about regulation, risk is a very, very key part of that. But also supplier risk is a huge challenge. Are you going to be around in 2 or 3 years' time? How can you send a message of confidence and of growth, and that you have a clear strategy and you're delivering against that strategy out to the market? And media relations is one way to do that, but integrated strategies that include which events you go to, which panels you speak on, which white papers you put out, which thought leadership articles you write, blogs, social media, video, et cetera, et cetera. And by having integrated campaigns, that's how you communicate those messages very, very clearly that are resonant and relevant to the individuals and the personas, if you like, in that buying cycle business. Again, kind of buyer, decision maker, influencer, user, and potential roadblocker.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you said I want to dig into a little bit more is really understanding in depth what business problems all of those different people in your buying committee are facing as they're trying to make decisions to bring their business forward or solve a particular problem, achieve a specific goal. Each one of them is looking at it kind of differently. And I find that a lot of suppliers don't necessarily understand what the customer is dealing with from a broader perspective. It's like, it's not just about the business case for your technology. It's about how it fits into their whole ecosystem and their whole workflow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is very true. And I kind of look at that from two perspectives. One of them is product, and actually the product, its functionality. Just to repeat exactly what you said, to endorse and echo what you just said, which is, how does that align throughout the entire life cycle of whatever somebody's trying to achieve, whatever that process is trying to achieve. But then there's also the psychological aspect to it as well, and the kind of behavioral aspect. I do a lot of mentoring with early stage businesses. They imagine they can walk into a bank and say to a bank, we're going to save you £1 million. Well, £1 million is just a rounding error to a globally significant financial institution. And if you think about, you're talking to somebody who spent 25 years trying to build their empire. When you say that you can reduce the headcount by 20%, actually that's an empire that's very important to them. So some of those platitudes that we naturally would be wanting to throw out, like we reduce cost and risk and headcount and this and that, actually they don't always land. And what's important is really and again, this is what I say to a lot of the early stage businesses, is you have to be comfortable keeping company with your most senior clients and really getting to understand what it is, really very specifically, what is it that they're trying to solve? For example, we're doing a lot around a piece of regulation in Europe at the moment called MiFID II, and MiFID II has many technical standards. So when you talk about, we're able to help everybody address their MiFID II challenges, that's not going to land. When you get into, we help firms address this regulatory technical standard that talks about algorithmic trading in a very specific way. That's when people begin to pay attention, because they'll say, to your point about workflow, we've got everything else covered, but that's a one piece that we can't solve. And that's why we want to talk to you. And that's why we want to come in. But that's also then the power of collaboration and the appreciation that you don't provide or supply in isolation. So that looking for the ways in which you can integrate very easily, and of course open APIs, and there are many open source ways of doing that, but be able to demonstrate that you can integrate and that actually you can fit in very neatly to a master plan that somebody who may be the head of technology has got in their heads, is going to take you much further than just saying this is what we do and we do it in isolation and we're very kind of protectionist about our efforts.
It strikes me as you say that there's an element of compassion that you need to have for your customer, a level of compassion to really understand what they're going through, including the integration issue and the regulatory issues and the risk issues, and even compassion for the kind of roadblocks that they're facing internally. If you don't have that, your business case is not going to work.
Yes, and emotional intelligence is one of the least appreciated dynamics that need to come to play. It's interesting, more and more people are talking about it, because actually you need to have that kind of emotional quotient as a leader of a business or as a senior executive in a business, because you need to remember a simple principle in sales. And I've done this, I work for a large brokerage company where we kind of created a sales model. And the first thing we ever said to our salespeople, whether we were training in Europe or US or even out into, we were just beginning to take it to Asia when I left, is people do business with people they like. And that's where that relationship, that real empathy and that understanding of what keeps your customer awake at night needs to be done in the most compassionate way. And if you go into a client and go, well, what keeps you awake at night? They will back away immediately. But it's then about the finesse. It's about the finesse of the relationship. And actually just being smart enough to kind of realize that actually people won't always open up. And the key to it is beginning to build a relationship which encourages them to open up. In my business, in your business, we call it, the trusted advisor. And in fact, any consulting business is always, when do you become the trusted advisor? And that is earned. That's earned over time. And that's where rock steady relationships, but also confidence in the confidence that you keep with your clients as well, is incredibly important.
One of my clients is targeting marketing departments in asset management companies. And the CEO told me a story about how he went to a big sales kickoff for one of their newest clients and was in this room with marketing and about 35 or 45 sales reps that I think they were in the wholesaling business. I'm not sure. But my client was getting up to present second. And first, they were presenting some new branding thing, I think, for the target audience. And the salespeople went bananas. They were so angry at what this marketing department was changing that they didn't let the guy get past slide 3. And they're just reaming him. And so my client was sitting in the back going, oh, shoot, this is going to happen to us too. But it gave him a whole new sense of empathy for what their customer is going through. It's rare that you get that, where you actually get to be in the room when somebody's being beat up. But have you ever been in a situation where you can find that out about your customer or your customer is finding out about their client? It creates a whole new sense of empathy.
Only in so much as watching them and enabling them and helping them for panels at large conferences. So helping them think through the best way to be a good panelist. And often the best way of being a good panelist is to listen rather than to pound out your key messages. We've all sat there and we've all watched, kind of terrible panelists because they just want to talk about what they want to talk about. And watching how maybe not so much watching them get beaten up, but watching how a relationship improves because of the empathy that you can build on a platform in front of an audience. And that takes experience, and that also takes quite a lot of preparation and confidence as well. But when it works well, it's impressive to watch.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because you do see a lot of people on panels that do just want to pound out their message and they come away thinking that they've really accomplished a lot, but the audience does not come away with the same impression.
Right. Yes, exactly. And now, that's because it's not all about you.
Right.
It's actually about, but when I chair a lot of panels, what I say to the panelists is, I'm not here to serve you, I'm here to serve the audience. And if I feel that at any point you're being too salesy, then I'm going to pull you up on it and we'll move on very quickly because actually that's not what audiences want. And if you're building a relationship, not only with your co-panelists, some of them might be your customers or your potential customers, but also, a lot of your customers and potential customers sit in the audience, and it all counts towards how you build that empathy, how you build that compassion and an appreciation of the things that they are thinking about by listening and contributing in a very appropriate way.
So one of the things that we've talked about in the past is thought leadership and how you don't want to get too far ahead of your customer, but that your thought leadership really needs to reflect what your customers are experiencing today and maybe what they're going to experience in the next 6 months. But you don't want to go too far ahead of them in order to be relevant. And that's both on that stage when you're talking on a panel and when you're meeting with customers. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what your experience has been around that?
Yeah, certainly. The interesting sort of line that we have to tread is, you don't want to be too forward looking because one of your competitors could come in and kind of steal a march on you by taking your idea and your vision and then bring out a product to respond to it. But what is important, particularly with early stage businesses, is that as you're going through that sales cycle and that sales process, particularly when you get to procurement, by the way, that you are demonstrating that you will be around for some time to come. And that in your product development pipeline, you're thinking about not only what keeps your customers awake today, but also what they need to be thinking about tomorrow. And they most likely are. And therefore, building a confidence in your message that you will be bringing out new products and services and functionality and enhancements, and thinking about other collaborations and thinking about other ways to serve a market. Because when you think about the billing cycle or the budgeting cycle for clients, before you know it, we're round to September and we're doing budget season in October. And people are always thinking 1 or 2 years ahead. They might be addressing what's under their nose today, but heads of strategy are thinking about what comes next. So building on your relationship today, but also demonstrating that you are also thinking a year or 2 ahead as well.
We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of creating an air of growth and confidence to avoid the perception of supplier risk. And one of the things that I'm seeing in the market is a very significantly increased role for procurement in making decisions about suppliers, not just about who we're going to establish a relationship with, but they're actually looking at vendor consolidation and forcing business units now to reduce the number of vendors they're working with. So what can companies do to give procurement, who doesn't necessarily understand the business solution, a sense of confidence?
I think there are a number of things. One of them is about sponsorship internally. So when you're going through the sales cycle, is ask your buyer, decision maker, influencer, user, whoever that is, ask them at what point procurement get involved, and how can you help them explain the value that you bring, given that backdrop that you described, which is, kind of probably oversupplied relationships. And then also it's important to think about your distribution networks. So what we're finding quite a lot is that large financial institutions are saying, look, we know we need to innovate. There's constant conundrum between, do we do it ourselves? Do we bring in external parties? If we bring in external parties, they're probably quite large enterprise-driven or enterprise-focused organizations, but are they necessarily the most innovative? So if you can be aligning yourself with some of those distributing firms that are looking at enterprise-wide challenges for the large institutions, then you've got a greater chance of getting through because you're essentially kind of part of their ecosystem, as you might want to call it. But the other thing also is if you want to go out on a loan is, again, to think about demonstrating how easily you can align through, APIs and open source and other ways, and platform integration, or easily kind of readily integrated into other people's platforms. So you can clearly define where you fit into that mix.
And I think this all goes back to needing to build a culture of receptiveness in the organization. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think you as an organization, I certainly think about this a lot, which is we're plowing a path successfully. I'm very happy to say, kind of 10 years in, we're doing this, and what we do is we do it very well. But I'm often thinking the things that keep me awake is, are we being receptive to what our clients are asking us to do? And, do we pick up every buying signal that a client sends to us going, well, actually, we've got a challenge here and we think you could probably help us with it? Are we thinking about what they're doing today, and are we thinking about what they ought to be doing tomorrow in order to be successful themselves? And that's all about a mindset. That's a leadership mindset about being open to and really thinking about what you're hearing. Also about keeping track of what's going on in the industry to be able to offer suggestions to your clients. And how do you test then that this is the right way to go in terms of your product development or service development as well? And it's no different whether you're a product supplier or whether you're more of a consultancy service supplier. The concept is exactly the same. You just got to keep your antennae on high alert all the time. But also be very critical about, is this going to take you in a direction where you move away from your core competency? And where is it that your customers really rely upon you because they know you can do things better than anybody else can because of experience, expertise, case studies to back you up, products that are tried, tested, easy to integrate, well-serviced, both pre-sale and post-sale. Don't get away from your core competency in the appetite of running off in different directions. Does it all fit within your natural sphere of service?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand what your customers perceive your core competency to be, because I don't find that always aligned between the internal sense and the customer's sense of what you're really good at as an organization.
That's true. That's very, very true. And in fact, it's one thing we're thinking about as we hit our 10th anniversary is, I spend a lot of time with our customers, but actually thinking about, do they see us the way that we do? And quite often I surprise myself and I think I know what we're very good at. But then when you really think about it, we slightly forget that we're very good at other things as well. So, it's very important. It's not an internal thing. It's about really testing it externally and asking your customers what they think.
So I think that's a perfect place to close. Thank you so much, Julia. This has been a great conversation.
It's a pleasure. As always, I'm always happy chatting this stuff through with you.
That was such an interesting conversation. Thank you to Julia Streets for sharing. My biggest takeaway was how important compassion is in the marketing and sales process. You can't have compassion without understanding, and you can't have understanding without establishing relationships with the buying committee and finding out what's really important to them. This all-important need for empathy also ties into the research for developing buyer personas. I see so many firms trying to shortcut this process, but only by really talking with your customers can you figure out what's important to them. And only when you know their hot buttons can you create an effective messaging strategy. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Let me know if you found it helpful, and also let me know if you have any suggestions for future speakers. You can get more information about Julia and Streets Consulting at streetsconsulting.com or visit propelgrowth.com/trendspotters and scroll to episode 11. There, you'll find a transcript for this episode and links to Julia's website and social profiles. And join me in 2 weeks for our next talk.
Hey, thanks for listening. We hope you found value in today's episode and welcome your feedback. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes or Stitcher. We'd really appreciate your help with getting the word out about Trend Spotters. Could you please review us on iTunes and share the podcast on LinkedIn and Twitter? Thanks. For more insights on smart business growth, visit us at propelgrowth.com.